The forest went completely silent the moment they came face to face. Not a bird chirped. Not a rustle in the leaves. Even the wind seemed to pause. There were no cameras rolling. No crowd cheering. No script to follow. Just the raw, tense air of anticipation. On one side stood the park ranger, chest puffed, shoulders squared, confidence oozing from every step. He was tall, strong, and clearly proud of his physical dominance. He thought that authority, combined with brute strength, would make anyone back down. He didn't know he was about to meet someone who had faced far more than mere arrogance before. And on the other side, Keanu Reeves. Calm. Still. Focused. No theatrics. No posturing. Every inch of him radiated quiet confidence. The kind that comes from years of preparation, discipline, and mastery over both body and mind. He wasn't here to show off. He wasn't here to intimidate. He simply existed, fully aware of his abilities, fully in control of his reactions. The ranger smirked, thinking he could provoke fear. He made the first move, a quick step forward, testing Keanu's reaction. But instead of retreating or flinching, Keanu shifted slightly, subtle, deliberate, like water flowing around a rock. The ranger's smirk faltered, just a fraction, as he realized the man opposite him was not reacting out of fear. He was analyzing, waiting, anticipating. Two completely different worlds had collided. One fueled by ego and bravado, the other by skill and calm precision. And in that brief moment, before anything physically happened, everyone present, if there had been witnesses, would have felt the weight of it. The ranger's confidence was a heavy, crashing force. Keanu's composure was the invisible hand that could redirect it effortlessly. Then came the kick. Bold, sharp, meant to assert dominance. But what followed was not what the ranger expected. A counter, subtle yet precise, shifted the momentum in an instant. Not a loud noise, not a dramatic stumble. Just a subtle, undeniable demonstration that power alone doesn't always win. The forest held its breath. Even in that small clearing, the world seemed to pause as if waiting for the outcome. But the real shock wasn't the movement, the dodge, or the counter. It was the quiet, unspoken lesson that was unfolding right before their eyes. Before you imagine this as some chaotic street fight, pause for a moment and really picture the situation. This wasn't a staged showdown for cameras. There were no hashtags, no viral challenge, and certainly no movie set. There were only two people in that forest clearing, and what was about to happen was dictated by skill, preparation, and experience, not ego or spectacle. The park ranger had a reputation. Strong, confident, and perhaps a bit overconfident, he carried himself with the authority of someone used to being in control. Years of enforcing rules and facing tense situations had made him think that strength and assertiveness could command respect, or fear. In his mind, this encounter was no different. A swift kick, a show of power, and he could establish dominance, proving that anyone who stepped into his territory would regret it. But standing opposite him was Keanu Reeves. A man whose calm presence often concealed a level of skill most people never see. Few realize that Keanu is not just an actor. He has dedicated years to mastering martial arts, blending techniques from various disciplines. From the meticulous preparation required for his John Wick films to his understanding of strategy, timing, and body mechanics, Keanu had spent a lifetime refining his reflexes, conditioning his body, and sharpening his mind. Every movement he made in those films was grounded in real, practiced skill, not movie magic. This moment in the forest wasn't a fight to impress anyone. It wasn't about who could win or who would dominate. It was a test of principles. One side relied on raw power and confidence, the kind that comes from enforcing authority and surviving confrontations in the real world. The other relied on precision, timing, and experience honed over decades of disciplined training. What made this clash so fascinating wasn't the physical confrontation itself, it was the contrast of philosophies. The ranger believed that dominance comes from strength. Keanu demonstrated that real mastery comes from awareness, adaptation, and control. Strength without skill can create impact, but skill without strength can redirect it, neutralize it, and even transform it into something unexpected. Even the environment played a subtle role. The clearing was uneven, scattered with leaves and roots. A misstep could change everything. The ranger was used to being on flat, predictable ground. Keanu moved in a way that accounted for every detail, angles, balance, the flow of momentum. Every small adjustment made a difference. Every micro-movement mattered. And yet, despite the tension, there was a sense of calm. Neither intended to humiliate the other. There was no shouting, no aggressive posturing beyond what was necessary. This was about control, discipline, and testing limits, not ego. Observers, if there had been any, would have noticed that each motion, each feint, each step was deliberate. Every action carried intent, every pause carried experience. This encounter wasn't about proving who was stronger. It was about demonstrating the difference between force and mastery. One could dominate a situation with raw aggression, but another could navigate that same situation with patience, timing, and strategy, and often do it more effectively. The moment they faced each other in the clearing, something shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but you could feel it in the air. The Ranger's confidence radiated like heat from a fire, ready to consume anything in its path. Keanu, by contrast, was cool, grounded, and composed, every movement measured even before the first strike. They bowed. Not out of ceremony but out of respect, the unspoken language of martial artists. Respect first. Ego second. The Ranger's bow was rigid, sharp, demanding acknowledgement. Keanu's was calm, deliberate, fluid, a reflection of his internal control. In that simple gesture, the contrast between them became undeniable. The first exchanges were subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. A step forward, a slight shift in stance, a probing jab to gauge reaction. The Ranger relied on raw forward pressure, strength, weight, and intimidation combined. Each movement was meant to dominate. He was confident, sure, even cocky that force alone would determine the outcome. Keanu responded differently. He moved with angles, timing, and patience. Not a single swing was wasted. Every adjustment, every pivot, was designed to maintain balance, create openings, and test the Ranger's reactions. He didn't meet aggression with aggression. He met it with calculated response, turning momentum into opportunity without unnecessary risk. Observers, if there had been any, would have noticed how the dynamic shifted with every micromotion. The Ranger's strikes were powerful, heavy, loud in intention. Keanu's counters were quiet, subtle, precise. There was no chaos, no wild flailing, just controlled, intentional action. And yet, tension built with every second. Then came the first real test. The Ranger lunged with a kick, full force, aimed to assert dominance. In an instant, Keanu shifted his weight, pivoted, and deflected it. Not with strength, not with brute force, but with timing and balance. The Ranger's kick landed, but only partially, leaving him slightly off-center. That brief misalignment was enough for Keanu to gain subtle advantage. Every strike from that point carried intent. Every movement revealed experience. The Ranger's ego flared. He had faced resistance before, but never like this. He expected a reaction fueled by fear or hesitation. He got neither. He got calm precision, the kind that doesn't panic, doesn't overreact, and never wastes energy. For a moment, it looked as if raw strength might overwhelm skill. The Ranger pressed harder, faster, more aggressively. Keanu adapted instantly, each step calculated, each angle accounted for. It was like watching a storm meet a mountain, force against immovable strategy. And yet, no one moved recklessly. No wild swings, no uncontrolled power surges. Each exchange was deliberate, intense, and measured. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Leaves rustled softly underfoot, echoing the rhythm of this unspoken battle. By the time the Ranger realized that brute force wasn't winning the moment, it was too late. Keanu had already anticipated, already adapted, already subtly taken control. Not in a flashy display, not in a humiliating takedown, but with precision, calm, and undeniable skill. The first part of the sparring had been tense, but controlled. Now something changed. The Ranger's confidence shifted from curiosity to determination. He had realized that Keanu wasn't just moving, he was reading, predicting, adapting. And that revelation fueled him. He pressed harder, moving faster, leaning into every step as if sheer aggression could force a breakthrough. Keanu, in response, remained calm. His body language didn't betray fear or frustration. Every step, every pivot, every subtle adjustment was intentional. He wasn't trying to overpower the Ranger. He was letting the Ranger's energy guide him. It was like water meeting rock. The force comes forward, and yet it is redirected, dissipated, transformed. The distance between them collapsed. Steps were quicker, angles tighter. The Ranger's strikes became sharper, more forceful, but still measured by someone untrained in timing like Keanu. The forest clearing felt smaller, as if the energy between them pulled everything inward. The rustling leaves underfoot matched the rhythm of their clash, every shift in stance creating invisible tension that no outsider could ignore. Then it happened, a flurry. Not wild, not reckless, but a rapid sequence of kicks, feints, and measured strikes. The Ranger thought he could corner Keanu with sheer aggression. For a heartbeat it seemed possible. The Ranger's movements carried all the power of his physicality. But Keanu's adjustments were instantaneous. Step, pivot, lean, he maintained balance, absorbed the momentum, and subtly shifted it. A kick that would have thrown anyone else off balance barely grazed him. For a moment, the Ranger faltered. Just a fraction, a microsecond, but enough to show the difference between force and mastery. Keanu's counter wasn't flashy, but it was undeniable. A slight redirection of energy, a perfectly timed step, and the Ranger's momentum carried him past his intended target. He stumbled, not to the ground, not dramatically, but the shift in control was evident. The session, which had started as curiosity and measured testing, now became a real demonstration of the difference between power and precision. Observers, or anyone imagining this scene, would have noticed something profound. The strongest person in the clearing wasn't necessarily the one who struck hardest. It was the one who could adapt, who could see through force, who could respond to every challenge without panic. Keanu's eyes never left the Ranger's. Calm, focused, unshaken. There was no gloating in his gaze, no arrogance. Only control. Every micro-movement in his stance spoke volumes about experience, preparation, and discipline. Meanwhile, the Ranger's confidence, which had seemed unstoppable just moments before, began to waver. He realized that raw power was impressive, but it could be neutralized by timing, balance, and strategy. A pause came naturally. Breaths were measured. Energy shifted. Then, almost imperceptibly, the Ranger launched one last attempt. Strong, fast, meant to regain dominance. And almost like a dance, Keanu met it exactly where he needed to be. A subtle step, a slight redirection, a perfectly balanced recovery. The Ranger stumbled again, not humiliated but reminded of a fundamental truth. Power alone isn't enough. For those watching, the lesson was clear, even without commentary. Domination isn't about hitting harder. Victory isn't about overwhelming someone with aggression. True mastery is about observing, adapting, and acting with precision when it matters most. In that forest clearing, the shift had happened. The moment wasn't defined by a knockdown or a dramatic finish. It was defined by awareness, skill, and the quiet but undeniable demonstration that ego can never match disciplined control. After the session, the story began to spread. Not surprisingly, people started filling in the blanks with assumptions, exaggerations, and, in some cases, outright fabrications. Some said the park ranger had been humiliated, knocked off balance completely by Keanu's effortless moves. Others claimed that Keanu had dominated the encounter from start to finish, his skill leaving no doubt as to who was superior. Social media buzzed with imagined drama, people projecting their own desire for conflict onto a moment that had, in reality, been far more nuanced. The truth, however, was far less sensational, and far more fascinating. Observers who had actually been present described something entirely different. They spoke not of humiliation or dominance, but of mutual respect and controlled exchanges. They saw two individuals testing each other without ego, without showmanship, without the need to win in the eyes of outsiders. What the world thought was a story of one man triumphing over another was, in reality, a demonstration of discipline and mastery that few could fully appreciate. The Ranger, for all his confidence and authority, was not embarrassed. He had learned something in that forest clearing that day, something profound. Strength, unchecked by awareness, can falter. Power, when misapplied, can be redirected. And arrogance, no matter how loud or visible, can never match experience and discipline. He may have imagined the encounter as an opportunity to assert dominance, but in truth, it had become a lesson in humility, timing, and the limits of brute force. Keanu, for his part, offered no public statements, no posturing, no attempts to correct rumors. He did not need to. His approach was consistent with everything he had demonstrated during the session. Calm, deliberate, and focused entirely on mastery rather than perception. To him, the encounter was not about proving superiority, it was about responding correctly, preserving control, and respecting the principles of martial arts, even in an unexpected confrontation. This disconnect between perception and reality is one of the most common mistakes people make when witnessing skill-based encounters. The human mind craves drama, a winner and a loser, a clear victor to celebrate or vilify. But in moments like these, the most profound lessons happen quietly without spectacle. The subtle movements, the deliberate adjustments, the anticipation and adaptation, these are what truly define mastery. They don't make headlines in the same way as a dramatic knockdown or a viral victory clip, yet their impact is far greater for anyone paying attention. Observers noted that both the Ranger and Keanu maintained control throughout. No knockdowns occurred. No shouts or insults broke the silence. Every exchange was measured. Every reaction was intentional. Even when the ranger launched a bold kick and Keanu countered with precise timing, there was no humiliation, only awareness, experience, and respect. This is what made the moment remarkable, though it was largely overlooked by the gossip and assumptions that followed. It's also worth considering why the public so often misinterprets these encounters. People want to believe in quick victories, in clear winners and losers, because that simplifies a complex reality. Skill, discipline, and adaptation are harder to recognize than brute force, so they often go unnoticed. Yet those who understand martial arts, or even just observe closely, know that mastery isn't about beating someone in a flashy display. It's about control, presence, timing, and knowing exactly how to respond when faced with unexpected challenges. In that sense, the forest clearing became a kind of paradox. What appeared to be a contest of dominance was actually a lesson in restraint. What looked like a confrontation between arrogance and skill was really an illustration of how awareness, preparation, and discipline always speak louder than raw power. And what the internet interpreted as drama was, in truth, a quiet, elegant demonstration of mastery in action. So when the stories circulated, distorted, and exaggerated, they missed the point entirely. The lesson wasn't about who won or who lost. It was about understanding that discipline can neutralize aggression, that skill can redirect strength, and that respect between individuals often outweighs ego-fueled confrontation. That is what surprised observers the most. Not a knockout, not a dramatic triumph, but the clarity and control both men maintained throughout the session. The forest clearing fell silent again, but this time the silence wasn't tense. It was reflective. The session had ended, or at least the active exchanges had, but the impact lingered. Not in bruises or dramatic gestures, but in the subtle, unspoken lessons that remained for both the participants and anyone imagining the scene. Keanu Reeves didn't raise his voice. He didn't boast, laugh, or comment. He simply stood, breathing evenly, maintaining balance and composure, a living example of what mastery looks like in action. Every inch of his posture communicated awareness, readiness, and self-control. It was clear that, for him, the encounter had never been about proving superiority. It had always been about responding correctly with precision and discipline under pressure. The ranger, on the other hand, had started the encounter with confidence and ego intertwined. He had assumed that strength and authority were enough to command respect and establish dominance. But over the course of those few intense minutes, he had seen the truth firsthand. Brute force can impress, but it cannot replace skill. Aggression can threaten, but it cannot match adaptation and timing. And arrogance, no matter how loud or visible, is fragile when confronted with calm expertise. There's a subtle difference between winning and mastering. Winning is often temporary, loud, and visible. Mastery is quiet, enduring, and transformative. In that forest, Keanu didn't win in the traditional sense. He didn't need to. The lesson was evident in every calculated step, every micro-adjustment, every subtle shift that kept him in control. And the ranger experienced it not as defeat in the dramatic sense, but as understanding. The kind of understanding that only comes when someone shows you, quietly and decisively, the limits of your assumptions. This is what most viewers and casual observers miss. The internet thrives on conflict, on drama, on the spectacle of a clear victor and a clear loser. But mastery is rarely loud. Discipline doesn't demand applause. Skill doesn't require an audience. And respect doesn't seek validation. The encounter between Keanu and the ranger demonstrated all of these truths simultaneously. Strength and skill coexisted, tension and calm intertwined, and the result was a moment of clarity rather than chaos. Think about it. In life, how often do we equate force with effectiveness? How often do we measure success by the ability to dominate rather than to respond? Most people react, push, and push harder, assuming the loudest or strongest approach will yield results. But mastery, the kind that Keanu demonstrated, teaches a different lesson. Awareness, patience, and adaptability often produce outcomes far more meaningful than raw force ever could. The ranger didn't leave defeated. He left enlightened. He had confronted someone who could neutralize aggression without effort, someone who could respond perfectly to each challenge, and in doing so, had learned something profound. Strength without awareness is fragile. Confidence without humility is temporary. And power without discipline is often wasted. Keanu, in turn, reinforced another lesson that rarely gets noticed. Real skill isn't about spectacle. It doesn't require dominance over others. It doesn't need validation or recognition. Mastery is about being prepared, remaining composed, and acting correctly under pressure. It's about growth, learning, and refinement. And sometimes, The most impressive display of strength is the one that leaves no one humiliated, no one knocked down, and no one devalued. This is why the forest clearing mattered. What many misrepresented as a dramatic confrontation was, in reality, a quiet education. It was a masterclass in restraint, control, and the subtle power of discipline. And the lesson extends far beyond martial arts. Whether in work, relationships, or everyday challenges, the ability to respond with clarity and awareness, rather than brute force or ego, is the mark of true mastery. In a world that rewards loudness, spectacle, and immediate gratification, this moment was a reminder that the greatest victories are often quiet, internal, and transformative. It's a lesson in patience, reflection, and the courage to remain composed when faced with challenge. The tension had finally dissolved, but the forest clearing was not empty. The energy lingered, subtle but undeniable, like the afterglow of a storm. Keanu Reeves and the park ranger stood a few paces apart, neither boasting, neither retreating. There were no dramatic gestures, no shouts, no camera flashes. Just two individuals, each defined not by ego but by discipline. It was easy for an outsider to misinterpret what had happened. Social media would later twist the encounter into a story of humiliation, of dominance, of victory and defeat. Headlines would scream about the ranger being instantly embarrassed, or Keanu outclassing him. But anyone who truly understood the situation, anyone who could see beyond the surface, knew that the real story was neither about winning nor losing. It was about control, mastery, and respect. Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't even smile because there was nothing to celebrate in a way the world would recognize. For him, mastery isn't loud. Discipline doesn't require applause. True skill is quiet, unassuming, and enduring. Each measured step, each subtle adjustment he had made during the encounter, reflected years of practice, patience, and the understanding that skill is a tool, not a weapon for ego. The ranger, meanwhile, had come into the clearing full of arrogance and certainty. But he left changed, not humiliated, not defeated, but enlightened. He had confronted someone who could neutralize force with precision, someone whose calm presence turned aggression into learning. The realization was humbling yet empowering. He had been reminded that raw strength is only part of the equation. Timing, awareness, and control are the elements that truly define mastery. The real lesson was subtle yet profound. Strength without wisdom is fragile. Confidence without humility is fleeting. And power without restraint can often be wasted. The forest clearing had witnessed a silent exchange that transcended conflict. What appeared to be a confrontation between two individuals had actually become a demonstration of principles that apply to all areas of life: work, relationships, challenges, and even personal growth. This was not a lesson about proving superiority. It was a lesson about perspective. In a world obsessed with spectacle, the encounter reminded us that true victories are often invisible, internal, and enduring. The kind of mastery Keanu demonstrated cannot be measured by cheers, by applause, or by viral clips. It is measured by composure under pressure, by adaptation in the moment, and by the quiet awareness that every action has consequence. The forest itself seemed to acknowledge this. Leaves rustled softly in the breeze, as if nature itself recognized the subtle victory of control over chaos. The sun filtered through the canopy, casting fragmented light across the clearing. In that moment, the environment mirrored the encounter. Calm, balanced, yet alive with potential energy. There was no spectacle, only clarity. Keanu and the ranger exchanged a final look, a brief nod of acknowledgement. No words were necessary. Respect had been established, not through domination, not through force, not through ego, but through recognition of each other's skill and presence. That silent communication carried more weight than any dramatic shout or boast could ever convey. It was a lesson in humility, composure, and the power of restraint. And for those who witnessed it, truly witnessed it, the moment became unforgettable. It wasn't about the kick, the stumble, or the flurry of moves. It was about what those moves represented: confidence without arrogance, strength without noise, and mastery without humiliation. It was a rare glimpse of discipline in its purest form, a reminder that control is often the highest form of power. This story, like many misunderstood encounters, challenges the way we view conflict. The world wants winners and losers, drama and spectacle. But true mastery exists beyond that. It is quiet, measured, and enduring. It is about growth, not ego. It is about responding effectively, not dominating recklessly. And it is, above all, about respect, both for oneself and for the opponent. As the forest cleared and the ranger walked away, the energy shifted. There was no resentment, no bitterness. Only understanding. The encounter had changed both men in subtle ways. Keanu's calm had reaffirmed the power of discipline, while the Rangers' confrontation had underscored the limits of unchecked ego. Together, they had demonstrated something rare in a world addicted to spectacle: the beauty of strength tempered by control. Backhand index pointing right. Does every confrontation need a clear winner? Backhand index pointing right, or is mutual respect, patience, and measured response the highest level of victory? In the end, the forest clearing held a lesson far greater than any viral headline could convey. Two individuals, different in background, experience, and style, had come together in a moment of tension. And when it was over, there were no belts exchanged, no titles claimed, no humiliation imposed. Only growth, only awareness, and only the quiet, undeniable truth that mastery is defined not by victory over others, but by mastery over oneself. And maybe that is the real shock. A kick that was meant to assert dominance became a moment of reflection. A confrontation that could have ended in chaos instead ended in clarity. And for anyone willing to look closely, the lesson was clear. Strength is admirable, skill is impressive, but discipline and respect, those are the true markers of power.